Well, good morning, SSR group. It's been a while since we've seen, or I've put a video out, and we're going to do this one. And we're talking about canning pork. All right, this is going to be kind of a lengthy video. I'm going to try to chop it up once I get this and another one that I had posted up on our site, cleaned of all the fat like this. We're going to cube it down. I'm going to take the bone out that's in it. We're going to cube it down, then we're going to go through the steps on what it takes to what's called cold packing, where you use raw meat into clean, sterile jars with salt into a pressure canner, and you can it and it cooks while it's in the jar. You need to remove all this fat, or as much of it as you can, because fat of this type can cause canning to go rancid. So I cut off as much of the fat as possible. You want to leave some fat in there because that's also where the flavor resides. I bought these two large pork roasts, which you saw the pictures posted today on our Facebook group at Walmart. They were going to they were almost to their sell date. So they pull them and they freeze them and they mark them down, and I got them at 50% off. So I think there were 4 in the case that day. I bought all 4 of them. And in this day and age, you want to look for the yellow tags, because that's the key. I look for yellow tags on chicken, on pork, not so much beef, because I have to have a grass-fed beef because of my allergies. But this, once we get this bone out, this is about 8.5 pounds. It's probably gonna drop closer to 6. And between the 2 pieces of pork that I had in the pictures, plus pork shoulder that I partially cut yesterday, which is this one, I'm probably going to have somewhere between 12 to 15 pounds of meat, give or take, which means about 12 to 15 pints of processed pork, which will be shelf stable. And I've pulled meats off my my reserves off the shelf that were there for 3 years, and you could eat it right out of the jar. So I'm going to get to cutting. I'm going to trim some of this up. I'll let you watch some of it, then I'll break away and I'll come back when we start cutting and canning in the glass. And I will say, in order to do this process, you want a decent sharp knife, and you can spend big bucks on knives. The ones that I found that I like the most are these kind. They look like this. They come in butcher's cleavers. They've come in other types of styles, even to the point of steak knives and paring knives and the like, but they're Rada, R-A-D-A. I find them at our local Amish store where I can get them, or where I get my Amish bacon. And this knife here was probably about 10 bucks. And I'll tell you what, it's sharp enough to cut just about everything, including your finger if you're not careful. But this is a boning knife, and it's made specifically for stuff like this, because as you can see, here's a bone in here. But this bone is pretty significant, which I'll show you here in a second as I remove it. Because here's the other side of that bone, and you can see it there. I just take that knife, I slip it down inside, and just run it right along the bone edge. And it will cut right down and free the meat away from the bone and allow you to get it out. And I've gotten pretty good at this. I've done this a few times. I usually, if I can get my pork this way, I will do it, especially if I'm getting ready to do a batch of Spam, which if anybody wants that recipe, I'll tell you how that's done, because I do my own Spam, and it's a lot cheaper than buying it for the $2 or $3 as it is, even at Walmart right now. But yeah, I just follow the bone edge all the way down until I can get it out. As you can see, as I'm layering it away, we're starting to see the bone itself right here. Now, I will say, if you're going to do this, you want a cutting board that's not going to spin like a table, like a turntable for records. This is one we have. Not found Another one yet that I like that's this thickness, so it's easy to clean, so I just tolerate the record player's effect of working in the kitchen sometimes. So as I remove the bone, I will set it aside because I will get the majority of the meat that's still on this bone off. Waste not, want not. So I do that, and then I start working on getting as much of this fat off. I will slip a knife underneath this way because what you're going to see once I do this, if you think of bacon and the way the fat strands off through bacon, you'll see what I mean here. Now, Radish sells a sharpening tool, which I will show you here in a minute because this knife is a little dull. That was my helpful assistant. Could you grab me the blade sharpener? And there's just one piece of fat. As you can see, it layers through. So what I do with this is I actually will cut it down and I'll throw it into a skillet, and then I will take and render the fat off. This is that sharpening tool I was telling you about. Really nice. It puts a nice edge onto this knife in general. Which makes cutting a whole heck of a lot easier, because now it'll just slice right through. Where before, like you saw, I was struggling with that other section, just a little bit of an edge is all it takes to get this stuff off. And so I will work on this, and when it comes to the part where we start cutting and cubing, which not rocket science, but I'll come back at that point and we will talk more about the canning process and how it works. Okay, so now it's been completely deboned. These are the two sections of bone that were in those two pork shoulders. I have this small pot full, or bowl full of fat and the like, which I will render down and save. You can use that, season your cast iron skillets with and the like. And then the last is this large bowl of meat, which will be cut down, that we will use for the canning process. So, sorry for all the noise. Once I get to the point where I'll cut this down, this pork gets cut down into 1 inch or so sized cubes, nothing really larger, because you need to fit them down into a one pint jar. An example would be this. This is a large 1 pint largemouth jar, and that holds, the adage is, a pint is a pound around the world. And so you can fit approximately 1 pound of meat into a jar this size. This is the jar that I make, that I put all my meat in when I can it, either whether it's beef, ground beef, we brown, put it in, and we'll mix a little bit of broth with it. Venison, pork, chicken, we use 1 pound jars because then you have an idea about how much, or 1 pint jars, because you're using approximately 1 pound of meat. When I do my chilies, I grab a jar of beef or venison. If I have ground beef that's grass-fed, or venison, and I grab Italian sausage if I have it in this. And then I brown them and I put them into my chili. But in a jar like this with a seal that's still intact, where when you push it, it doesn't click. And this meat will last 3 to 4 years. Shelf grade, no refrigeration required. In fact, I still have on my shelf a 1 quart jar with 6, 7, 8 hot dogs. They were Oscar Mayer. Actually, ballpark, because when I put them into the jar and I put them into the canner, they swelled up and filled the jar. Well, then they shrink down. But they have a Vienna sausage type of consistency to it, and it's kind of like an experiment. I'm leaving them on the shelf to see how long they last. So in our house, we can beef, we can pork, we can chicken, we can turkey. We've canned ham in the past. I make my own Spam, which requires 5 pounds of pork shoulder like this, 1 pound of canned ham, like you would get at the store, plus salt and seasoning, salt and cornstarch, and there's a recipe for that. I put it into a jar like this with I actually take a wooden spoon and run it down the inside of the jar to allow air escape from underneath. Put it into the canner, can it according to spec, and it cooks inside the jar, and I put it on my shelf. So when I come back and we start the cut, once I get the cutting process down and everything is cubed and we got the canner set up and ready to go, I'll be filming the next piece in regards to how to cold pack meats into a jar and how to run it inside your canner. All this information can be found either online, but my best suggestion in light of all things is that when it comes to literature or instructions, go out and get the book. You can go to Walmart or any of those kinds of places. You want to get the Ball Blue Book. It's like the Bible of canning, and in there it gives you instructions on how to can just about anything. We could can oranges, apples, pineapples. We've done peaches and apples, like dry apples. There are many ways you can do this, but this is one way to make yourself more self-reliant and less dependent upon issues in the store, which are starting to happen. Recently, I noticed that milk went up in the last month. This is March 28th. Yes, today is March 28th. And since the beginning of March, milk at Aldi's has gone up nearly 50 cents per half gallon. So we're going to continue to see this, and the only way to curb our bets and to survive this inflation and all the stuff that's going on is to be more self-reliant, being able to do canning like this, preserving food so that when we grow them, we can preserve them and have them so we don't have to depend on the supply line. So I'll come back once we get all this stuff cubed up and ready to go. I'll show you what it is to cold pack it into a jar. We'll show you how the canners are run. It takes like 90 minutes inside the canner once the canner is running. So it's an all-day process. So you're getting this in bits and pieces, and I'm going to clip it all down into one video. All right, thanks, guys. I'll come back in a little bit. Okay, now that the pork has been cut, has been cubed down into, well, sort of one inch cubes. Now we set up to do the rest of the process. Cross is going to require, we use kosher salt. You do not want to use an iodized or salt with iodine in it because it'll make the food funky flavored. We're using jars that are largemouth, and these are largemouth lids. I soak mine in hot water. We heat our jars just to get them warm while we have the canner getting hot. We have to wait for the canner to come to boil. And so while we're waiting for the canner to come to boil, we're going to take and place the pork that's in that tray into jars and ready it for the canner. And when we get to the jars filled before we lid it, I'll come back. Okay, for this project, we are able to fill 14 1-pint jars with pork. You want to fill it to, I usually use that little side marker rim edge at the bottom there, so you have that 1/2 inch of headspace. In it is, we use a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And now what we're going to do is, we also clean the whole top of the glass jar, the whole top of the ring where the lid sets. You want to wipe clean, make sure there's no grease or oils or dirts or anything like that on there. Now what we're going to do is lid them and put them into the canner, which is ready. Okay, we've put our first layer of 7 jars in the bottom of our canner. In goes this secondary stand. We'll stack another 7 jars on top of it. And then we'll seal up the canner. This is an All-American. It is a 25-quart canner. It is made out of spun aluminum. It has 6 locks on top. It's a locking canner that has a metal-to-metal, no gasket seals. Works very, very well for what we use it for. Now we're going to put the lid on it, latch it tight, and then run it for 75 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay, all 14 jars are now inside the canner. The canner has to now come back up to temperature. When you start seeing steam coming from that little spout there, we'll do it for 10 minutes that way, and then we put the weight on there, the jiggler weight, at 10 pounds, and that's based upon where you live as far as your height above sea level. Most canners will tell you what weight to use for what level of sea level, as well as the ball, the Ball Blue Book, which is like the Bible of canning. I'll be back once this is done and show you the results. Well, now that the canner has been steaming for 10 minutes, we will be using the 10, the mark at the bottom by my thumb, and it's indicated for 10 pounds. It goes on that stem right there, like that. Now, you wait until it starts to jiggle, and what you want to do is, you'll notice that this gauge will go up to 10 pounds, which also equals out to about 240 degrees. And then what you want to do, when it gets there, that jiggler will start to rattle, and you want to turn it down so it just barely jiggles, and once it starts doing that, you time it for 75 minutes. Okay, we'll be back when we're opening the canner. And that's about all the jiggling you want from one of these. So when it starts to do that, you want to turn it down. So you just get a little, because you don't want it to be overpressured. Kind of like that. Okay, so now, after 75 minutes, you shut the canner off. You allow it to come all the way down to 0 on its own. Don't pull the jiggler off, because you run the risk of breaking jars. And now we're going to see what we have. And the clicking is when lids actually suction down. That's the sealing process. That's how you know that they've sealed. And they can seal just coming out as they cool. Sometimes they seal inside the canner, but you leave these rings on that you can see here. for at least 24 hours just to ensure the seal, and then you can take the rings off, wash the jars before you store them. I'm going to pull all the jars out. I'm going to set them on the rack, and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, now you're looking at what the finished product looks like. The meat, when it cooks inside the canner, produces the juices that you see, and the bubbling is the air as the juices are cooling and the meat is cooling. And so for the next 24 hours, these are going to sit out just like this until such a time as we know that everything is done and they're cool. We'll check for seals that are solid, and as long as all the seals are solid, we'll date the top of the jars, put them down on our storage racks. If there's a seal that doesn't take, we put it in the refrigerator and use it right away. But that is how you cold pack and can meat. You can use that for any type of meat out there, beef, chicken, pork. We've canned ham in the past. It's a little trickier when you're doing fish. I would recommend that you would look at an instruction book for that, because I don't can fish. Vegetables, low acid vegetables, you do the same way, but you're using water and salt in those cans, and we can talk about that at another time. But I hope this is informative. I hope you like it. Hope it answers questions. If you have a question, leave it in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Bye.